Okay, everybody, it's 6 o'clock. Can I welcome everybody to the Planning Committee? Before I go through the apologies, there's something I have to remind everyone present at this meeting, that this will be broadcast live via the internet and the record is archived for future viewing. What I have asked for is for the public speaking at Planning Committee and how we proceed with the meeting to be left on your desk. So I think that it'll give you a bit of a guide. Many of us have had training on this process, so it should go without a hitch. And we'll look at it when we get to it. But just so that people at home know who's who on the top table here, we've got Louise Mills sitting on the far left, who will be taking the minutes. She's from Democratic Services. We've got Richard Price, who's the principal lawyer, sitting right next to my left-hand side. There will be apologies from Margaret Wilkinson. She's got the flu, so she won't be with us. And we've got the dream team on tonight, because we've got Rob Thomas, our director, who's come in to step in via Marcus Goldsworthy, who's somewhere on a ship between here and France. So that's where Marcus is. He sends his apologies. And then we've got one of the officers from the planning department, Jane Crofts. So that's the advice coming from the top table, with me being the chairman. I'll lead you on, first of all, for apologies and absence, please. If we have any. Apart from Margaret Wilkinson, of course. Audrey Preston, yeah. You're not sure? Okay. Oh, of course, Val Artery rang to say that she's not well.
And Councillor Rhiannon Birch.
And Councillor Rhiannon Birch. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair. We've also had apologies from Councillor Keith Hatton.
And from Keith Hatton. There we are then. Thank you for that. Minutes of the last meeting. Would members endorse those minutes? Okay, they've been moved. Seconded? Thank you. I'll sign them off. Can we have anybody who wants to declare any interests under the Council's Code of Conduct to do so now? No, I think it's been withdrawn. No, withdrawn. Yeah. Yeah. Okay then. Can we go straight on then to agenda item 4? This is a reference back from Cabinet. For you to notice about the Section 106 agreements and the protocol, and I'll ask Rob to lead us through it.
Thank you, Chairman. As you say, this is a report that went to the Cabinet meeting on the 26th of January. Cabinet are consulting with Planning Committee, and in terms of the report, many members will be aware of the procedure and the protocol that's in place for when Section 106 obligations are signed and contributions are received. In terms of the actual report itself, there's a protocol attached at Appendix A, which is an amendment. Now, members will be aware that previously, when financial contributions are received, we do consult with local members on how that money is spent. Usually, that goes through the system, and the money is how the money is spent is agreed. The previous protocol indicated that if there was disagreement, it be brought back before this Planning Committee for consideration. Paragraph 6 suggests that the most appropriate avenue for it to be considered is actually in Cabinet. The reason for this is that Section 106 money and the projects associated with Section 106 money are capital spends. They enter the capital programme, and it's actually Cabinet that determines the capital programme. So it makes far more sense for any issues to be reported back via Cabinet. So that's the main change, Chairman.
Okay. Any member want to speak about it? Yes, Councillor Mark Wilson.
Yeah, I fully endorse it, and I also like to point out that, of course, scrutiny also has a role in this, in actually scrutinising the capital expenditures stemming from those 106 agreements.
Thank you. Any other member? Councillor Jeff James.
Yeah, Chairman, I think we accept that this is what Cabinet wants. They want to be in control. And I can understand why, because of the current situation with budget pressures. It's important to control budgets and any monies in this kind of climate. But my only concern here is that the Planning Committee and the members of the Planning Committee had the most involvement in the agreement of the Section 106. They actually approved the 106. Any amendments to the 106 very often come back to the committee. So I think the committee have a degree of experience and understanding of the Section 106 that I don't think the Cabinet would have. What Cabinet will have is the ability to decide how the money will be spent. And I feel that that separates the interest that the members of the Planning Committee have in ensuring that the intent of the 106 is spent in the community of that application, because that's, after all, why the 106 is there, is to very often deal with and mitigate what the application's impact on the community. And therefore, if the members have a particular opinion, you know, I think it would have been better if it had come to planning, but I recognise that that the Cabinet will wish to do this, and it will probably be done. But I feel I should register that I feel members of the Planning Committee, after all, 106, there may be money, but it's actually mitigation for the community, benefits for the community and the council because of the impact of the additional development. And maybe that we could recommend to Cabinet that actually that the Planning Committee be consulted by Cabinet before they make the decision. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks for that, Jeff. I see that on the appendix that we're told that local ward members are still going to be able to comment on where these monies are spent. I don't see any change in that process, which it has to be good. But what the officer is saying is that there is going to be a slight alteration. It's going to go to Cabinet for endorsement and ratification. But I think it is a good move and the right move, like Councillor Wilson has said. But I'll hear it from any other member if they want to speak on it. Councillor Nick Hodges.
Thank you, Chairman. What's interesting in the Cabinet report is it does actually say that it's only been once that there's been an issue. So I feel better that it's not a common occurrence. What I will say is that when we've had major schemes that have brought in 106 money in my immediate area, there's always plenty of opportunities to spend that money, and usually very, very close to the actual affected area. And mitigation, of course, is a big part of that. I would be aggrieved if money, shall I say, earned in my area or anyone else's area is creamed off, or an excuse is made to be creamed off for another area without very, very, very good reason. And my only concern is the Cabinet could be tempted to do that on occasion. But the point I really wanted to make, though, is that this has also been to the Community Liaison Committee, and in a very good debate there, they actually expressed their thoughts that they believe that town and community councils should have some say, and it came down to the fact in the end that it would be up to us as county members to liaise with the local community areas and everything like that. Now, I can understand the reason for that, but who's to say that we have all the best ideas? The other thing is as well, is that in this changing world of local government, with the reshaping of services that's coming out, we are perhaps hoping and perhaps even expecting that town and community councils take on further responsibilities. Well, that would be a suggested way that they could take on further responsibilities with actually taking on some of the money that may be available to help them to do that. I'm not going to change that here tonight, but I think that should be considered as perhaps a bit of a carrot to go with the eventual stick of almost hoping and forcing town and community councils to take on more responsibilities, even especially if they don't want to. So I'm happy to note the report, Chairman, but there may be arguments in the future, and I may be one of those doing a bit of the arguing. But there we go. That's it at the moment, Chairman. Thank you for that.
Right, thank you. I think Andrew Parker would like to say something on the matter.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was in part responsible for asking that this matter be brought up. We were consulted, the 3 ward members in Cowbridge, when we had a fairly considerable sum of money from the Waitrose development, and we were asked to put forward schemes for improving education. We, in fact, went to all the schools and went to a lot of trouble to try and agree 5 sensible schemes, only to be sidelined at the end of the day. And the £86,000 from memory was then used to repair a roof of the school. So we had all the headmasters, etc., and mistresses encouraged to come forward with schemes, and unfortunately they were all let down at the very last minute. So I am pleased to see that it's now going forward this way, but I still feel that the ward members should have a reasonably considerable say in how the money is spent.
Thank you. Any other member before I ask? Yes, Councillor Edward Williams.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to clarify, on point 2 there, it says about allowing a 14-day consultation period for comments. I just wondered, is that sufficient? And it does say that that can be changed with agreement. I just wondered how that agreement is obtained for change in the 14-day. Yeah, thank you.
If I can deal with that that point first. I think what members have to remember is that this is specific to the way that money is actually spent on specific projects. So this follows a process where an application has been to Planning Committee, where the Section 106, the terms, if you like, of the Section 106 agreement have been debated at Planning Committee. Members are aware of the Section 106 agreement and the terms of that agreement, so this is not something that's coming to you as a new proposal. It's something that's been in the making for some time. That said, as with all consultation periods, we need to draw a line somewhere. We think 14 days is appropriate because there's a balance to be struck between the consultation on the options for spending the money and the actual need to spend that money, because very often the money is phased, or the development has been approved, takes a little time to get off the ground, on the ground, so that means there's a delay in getting the money. And as Councillor James says, it's about mitigating the impacts of the new development, so there's got to be a balance between consulting on it but also getting on to mitigate that new development and actually spending that money. That said, if we're aware that members are consulting with their local communities, for example, then there's no reason why that can't be extended in the same way as when we consult on planning applications. We give 21 days, which is a statutory consultation period. If the application is before us for longer than that, if anybody makes representations, we will take them into account. Just because they're beyond the 21-day period, it doesn't mean that we don't take those comments into account. So I can give you comfort on that, because if we know you need an extension as members, for example, if you are consulting with your town council or your community council, then that extension is not an issue and it's not a problem for us. In terms of the other comments that have been made, I would reiterate that there's only ever been one difference of opinion on this, so it is extremely rare. And the reason for that is that Section 106 obligations tend to be very topic specific, so whether it be affordable housing, public art, public open space enhancements, transport enhancements. So for example, we couldn't take a transport enhancement and spend it on something else. That amount of money is ring-fenced for that topic, but they're also geographically specific as well. So it's exactly, again, as Councillor James pointed out, if you've got a sum of money to mitigate a development in a certain community, then that money will be spent in that community. That really is not negotiable. There have been examples recently where we've pooled resources, and the best example I can think of is in Barry recently, where we've had quite a number of sums of money for public open space enhancements, and what we've done is, rather than spend small amounts of money on a large number of parks, we've actually pooled all that money, consulted with every member in Barry to get their views on a proposal to spend that money more wisely by pooling it, and that's worked very well, and all the members were in agreement to that, and it means that we've been able to use the money in a more efficient manner than we would otherwise be able to. So I'm confident that, you know, this is not an event that's going to be very widespread. We're not going to get into disagreement, because there's only been one case. And of course, if there is a disagreement, it'll go to cabinet, and the cabinet process is subject to call in as well. So you've got that safety net, if you like. If any member disagrees with the report that goes to cabinet or feels it needs scrutinising, that report can be called in itself.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Jonathan Bird.
Chair, just a quick one. Could I ask Rob how he can assure us that this process will happen? Because I know we've had a similar process in the past, which has been the protocol, and I can give you an example, well, he can probably knows of the example, where officers haven't followed the protocol. There was no disciplinary action to that officer, and he just spent the money on what he wanted without any consultation. So what reassurance can we have that this will never happen again?
Yeah, I do know of the example that you're mentioning. I suppose the reassurance I can give you is it hasn't happened since that time. There is an audit trail. There's also annual reporting. It means that every time we spend the money, it's accountable. We produce regular reports for Cabinet and for this committee on how that money is spent, how much money is in the budget, what's due to come in, and what's in the pipeline in terms of projects. So it's a very robust system, and it's a very open and transparent system. It has to be.
Assured? Okay. Are members happy then that we move this report and we accept it? Okay. Is anybody going to vote against it? No. And any abstentions? No. Lovely. Thank you. We move quickly on to agenda item 5 then. Site inspections. Rob, anything to add to site inspections?
Nothing from me, Chairman,
no. No, nothing. Note the report. All happy? Thank you. Building control regulation applications determined by the director under his delegated powers. Anything to add, Rob? No. Moved by Councillor James, seconded? Yeah. All happy? Thank you. Planning applications determined by the director under his delegated powers. Anything to add, Rob?
Nothing from me, Chair, no.
No. Any member? Moved by Councillor Jeff James, seconded? Yeah. All happy? Thank you. Appeals, which is on page 19. I think there's a number of appeals. I think you've won quite a lot of them, Rob, in your department. Some very interesting ones. Would you like to go through them with us?
Just very briefly, Chairman. Members will note that there's one enforcement appeal being received and a number of planning appeal decisions. The first one at Groesfine Road, Peterston, Super Ely has been allowed. Every other appeal then on your list has been dismissed, and the vast majority of those appeals relate to domestic proposals, and members will note, if they go through them, that there are a number of appeals where issues relating to amenity space, privacy standards and design have been considered, and we've been successful in all those appeals. So our decisions that were taken either by delegated powers or by this planning committee have been upheld.
Well done. Thank you. Any member? Anyone want to say anything? No? All happy? Move the report? Yeah. Going swiftly on then, on to agenda item 9, trees and trees on the delegated list on page 32. Anything to add, Rob?
No, nothing on this one, Chair.
No. Thank you. Moved. Seconded? Thank you. All happy? Thank you. Land and buildings at Saith Farm, Peterson Super Ely, on page 4. This is an enforcement action. I think I signed this off because the way the land was being treated needed some enforcement action taken quite urgently. So anything to add to it, Rob?
No, just to give members some key dates. Authorisation was granted for enforcement action to be taken back in July. As you rightly point out, Chairman, authorisation was granted by yourself on the 2nd of February for a stop notice, and the stop notice on this was actually served on the 5th of February. So this recommendation is for noting because that action and that authorisation has been given.
Thank you.
It's a very good question.
Chair, it's up the Groesfine Road to the top of the steep hill and turn left, and it's down there. Yeah.
Yeah. Farmer Drysdale knew that, so. Oh. Okay then. Rambler Drysdale, very good. Okay then. Note the report, please. Yeah, all happy? Thank you for that. Yeah, I don't think we do have to, do we, under the regulations? I think once I've signed it, it's... yeah. Okay then, planning applications. Land north of the railway line at Roos. We've had many a site visit at Roos, but I think, first of all, I'm going to have to tell you that we would have some public speaking on the matter. There are two gentlemen who put their names forward to speak for the application, and that would be Paul Williams from Savills and Mr. Andrew Wilkinson from the Waterman Group. We've got nobody who wants to speak against, but I can circumvent all that by just asking Councillor Jeff James, looking very bronzed with that tan. Nobody's going to believe that you've been to Tenby. But anyhow, if you want to make your application.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I did give you the courtesy of advising you that I was going to move a site visit. You rightly say, Chairman, we've been to Roos Point before, and we've been to the site that we previously approved of 350 houses. But I don't think we've actually specifically been to this part of this site of 350 houses. And as always, one of the issues that are of great concern is drainage, because we all know that the original development of Roos Point is protected by carrier drains, etc. So water going through this area is of key importance. And the scheme of drainage on this application differs from the one we approved on the neighbouring site. And I think members would benefit from having the new drainage scheme explained and all the other relevant issues actually on the site. And so I can move a site visit, Chairman.
I will second that.
Okay. Members happy for a site visit? Yes. Okay, then that'll be deferred until the 12th of March for a site visit. We'll see if we can get it the first one on the list then, Jeff.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for that. Now we go on to page 113, which is the former mortuary building Hayes Point. I think that many members will recall the visit that we paid to the mortuary. Inside, I have to say that it was an interesting visit because it just looked as though the mortician had downed his tools and walked out the building because everything was still in place. And I think at the time, I think you might have been chairman, Jeff, it was going to be a gymnasium, wasn't it? So we did get approval for a gymnasium, although I think it never took off for a gymnasium. But I'll ask the officer to lead us through. We're well acquainted with the building, so...
Okay,
Oh, sorry, we do have a speaker on that as well, Mr. Rob Mitchell. Is he here? Oh, right, okay then, so you're not going to speak. Okay then, fine. We'll ask the officer to deliver his report anyhow. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, just some housekeeping. There's a late representation before you. A letter from Dŵr Cymru Welsh Water giving their response to consultation, and as a result of that response we're recommending an additional condition 17 to deal with drainage schemes, but also an informative as well relating to drainage. In terms of the application itself, as you point out, this is for conversion and extension to the mortuary building so that it be used for residential purposes. One of two applications before you, because this is a building that lies in the curtilage of a Grade 2 star listed building. So by implication, the building itself is listed. So you have a planning application and then a listed building application. The proposal is for a extension and to use the building as extended as a 3-bedroom dwelling. The extension is a flat-roofed extension. The proposal includes a new hedgerow to provide a small amount of amenity space to the dwelling. In terms of the consultation, Surrey Community Council have indicated that they have no objection to the development because it would bring back into beneficial reuse the building, which has been vacant for some time. 12 letters of representation have been received raising some concerns, and they're listed on page 116. The report goes through the planning policies, both in our unitary development plan but also national policy. The main issues are set out and they start on page 119, and those are the principle of the development and the impact of the development on the character of the building and the setting of the listed building, as well as site-specific issues relating to amenity space, car parking and the impact on amenity. The report goes through all those issues in some detail and concludes that the application should be approved subject to conditions, which with the addition of the condition on your late representation runs to 17 in total.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Kevin Marnie to speak next. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Just two questions, basically, to Rob. Number one, I see one of the objections is a dispute between the owner and the management company over ownership of the land. Now, I do appreciate that you're allowed to put in plan application even if it's not your land. So it was just a case of, have you an idea if that has been resolved, or is it a case of it's none of our business, we stay out of that? But more importantly, it's the late representation that you've alluded to. On reading this here, my reading of it is that basically no water of any description can come from this premises or surface water and go anywhere near the public drains administered and maintained by Welsh Water. You have to excuse my ignorance on this. Wouldn't that mean some sort of almost trench and drainage system around this property to ensure that? Is this a usual sort of thing? And maybe you could enlighten myself and others of how such a thing would work, I should say. And should we be granting planning permission if the applicants haven't actually submitted a plan to deal with that?
Chair, on the first issue, Councillor Marnie's right. We wouldn't have any remit over land ownership issues. They would be legal issues relating to the dispute between the alleged landowner and any other party. So that is not a matter which we can get involved in. On the Welsh water issues, condition 17 seeks to address that very point in terms of the drainage condition. Foul and surface water discharges separately. Reading the Welsh water letter, they do allude to the fact that there should be no net increase of surface water to the public sewerage system, and that's to prevent hydraulic overloading. Condition 17 and the informative seeks to address that. Looking at the actual application itself, I don't see that there's any other way of resolving that other than to impose that condition to ensure that those details are provided and adhered to.
Would this mean obviously separate septic tank and or a water container, if you like, for possible recycling of the surface water and stuff? Is that the sort of thing we're talking about?
No, Chair, through yourself, Chair. I think this relates to surface water, so not foul. So this is issues of runoff from the roofing and from hard surfacing. So this is the type of water that would enter the drainage system, not from the foul system, but from the surface water runoff system. That's how I understand it. That requires that foul and surface drain separately. That's standard practice, so that it's to prevent surface water going into the foul system and overloading it, and it's common practice not to have the foul system going into the surface water system.
On that is that it also goes on the letter to say that Welsh Water aren't totally sure about their own drains and whatever, and have to have access to that. Presumably, from the wording of this, and I may be wrong on that, it looks as if the applicants haven't spoken to Welsh Water in any way, shape or form, and Welsh Water pointing out that they have to have access to their drains, and presumably further research and whatever would have to be carried out before any building work.
Yeah, that's quite correct, and I'm given on authority that is now standard advice from Welsh Water. It's probably relating to liabilities, and it's really putting the onus on the developer to ensure that the developer is aware of the systems that are in place, which in turn will be issues that are picked up under building regulations as well in terms of connections to sewers and drainage systems. So it will be picked up through the statutory process, and it's very much putting the ball in the court of the developer really to make sure that he or she or the company in question is aware of the systems before they try and develop and tap into those systems.
Okay. Well, it's any other member first. Yes, Jonathan.
Chair, would I be right in understanding, Rob, that there's an existing building there now which obviously has drainage, and the wording is not to increase? So long as the hard standing and the roof area is not greater, they would be able to use the existing drains. Am I right in that? Yes. Okay. Thank you.
And I would imagine there'd be a lot of water used before.
Yeah, they'd be sluicing down the low table.
Yes. Right, okay then. It's for officers' approval. Any member move? Seconded? Yeah. There, moved and seconded. All in favour? Any against? Councillor Marnie is against. Thank you. I'll ask if there's any abstentions, but I don't think there were any. No. Thank you. So we've gone from the former motion. The second one on page 132, this is to report this back, isn't it, to LBC?
Yeah, Chairman, this is a second application relating to the same site, but this is a separate application in that it relates to the works that require listed building consent. Similar issues to be considered here, but focusing very much on the impact on the listed building. And members will note that the recommendation on page 138 is not a decision to grant, but a decision to recommend listed building consent, because this has to go now to CADU for consideration, because CADU will be referring the matter and considering our recommendation before a decision can be issued.
Okay. Moved and seconded? Yeah. Okay. All in favour? Those against? Abstentions? Councillor Marnie has abstained. Thank you for that. Okay then, moving swiftly on to page 142. This has been a few site visits at Tudor Lodge in Bonvelston. I understand you're going to do an additional condition to this. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Chairman, yes. Just to explain, the report alludes to the fact that development is underway at the site. That development that has commenced is not in line with what is being applied for, so there is a difference. The applicant has confirmed that the application before you is the same, so the application proposal differs from what has been started on site, albeit at its infancy. As a result, we're recommending an additional condition 1, or a new condition 1 I should say, which is the standard time condition. And also, Chairman, if I may, the very final condition on page 150, with your agreement and with the agreement of committee, I'd like to slightly reword that condition, because as it stands it refers to works already commenced. We need to redraft that ever so slightly so that it relates to the development as before you, because obviously the works that have commenced have no bearing on this application because they don't have any status. So it's just fine-tuning of condition 5 as it becomes, to delete reference to works already commence and to replace that with prior to commencement of development.
Okay. Any member? Move. With that condition amended, as amended. Seconded? Yeah. Councillor James has seconded. All those in favour? Okay. Any against? Councillor Marnie is against. Thank you. Right. We're on to page 152, Coigi Colwyn Barn in Lancarvan. There must be a Welsh word for that, or an English pronunciation. Do you know what it is?
Sorry, Chairman. Colwyn Wood.
Colwyn Wood, you? Yeah. And Colwyn?
Probably somebody's name.
Yeah, and he's long gone. Oh, right, okay then. So it's on page 152. Marcus, would you like to... This was subject to a site visit today as well, wasn't it? Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. As you say, site visit earlier today. There is a late representation being submitted from the agent for the application, which takes the form of a heritage statement, which provides an assessment of the building in terms of its context and its heritage assets. The recommendation remains unaltered and the issues are laid out in the report. Of particular relevance in this case is that it is in a relatively isolated location. The sustainability credentials of the proposal are brought into question as a result. There's also a proposal to extend the building, and there is a little bit of concern that this is referred to as rebuilding of a previous extension, but if there was a structure there previously, it's not at all clear when it was demolished or removed. In accordance with policies, it's therefore recommended for refusal for those two reasons. The reason referring to the isolated position of the building, but also the alterations and the extent of the domestic curtilage.
Thank you for that, Rob. I know that it was called in for a site visit by Jeff. Are you the local member as well, Jeff, there? Yeah, I thought you might be. So I assume you're going to try and persuade us to overturn this decision. I think for me, looking at it on the site visit, it looks like a completely new build. building in the open countryside. There's no tie to it. And also, in 2008, 2009, when you were chair of the committee, you steered through some other barn conversions which we refused for similar reasons, like at the isolated location, not building in the curtilage of the village. You know, it was outside the boundary. So there were a number of reasons, and I clearly remember some of those barns. And I think this is in the same context, but you convinced me.
Chairman, I always remember the great advice given to me by the planning officers when I started as chairman. Even as a member of the planning committee, each application must be taken on its merits.
I knew you were going to come back with that, Jeff.
Don't start me, Jeff. Don't he had issues the other night in scrutiny. Don't start him, for God's sake.
So I think it's fair to say, Chairman, that when you're chairman, you have and must defend the policies of the council. I understand that, and I well remember that you've been in this position as well, Chairman, on other occasions. So I think it's fair. It's a fair attempt by you to advise the members of the committee they shouldn't listen to me. But on this occasion, I'll take advantage of telling them why I think they should. Chairman, I'm really grateful for the members who could attend the site visit. I couldn't. I didn't get back from holiday. I didn't get home till 1 o'clock today. But I think that the site visit would have been useful because this is not a sort of a ramshackle old barn with, you know, a metal structure with galvanized sheeting hanging on it. This is actually a pretty good built barn, stone built with brick. And I think, you know, the report that the agents of the applicant put in, you know, has merit in pointing out the value of the barn as an architectural feature. But the key thing for me is that this barn and land was gifted to the applicant, is not part of any other farm holding or land holding, so it isn't sitting actually in we would think of a farm applying for an agricultural building in the countryside. This is not part of a farm. So this is completely different and out of the settlement. I accept it's in the rural countryside, but then so is Lambetheri, so is Lancarvan. And this is actually on the border of Treguff, which is made clear in Hernan's report. But the point I want to make, Chairman, as you rightly said, I'd want to make, is that the building and paddock, as I pointed out, they're not part of any other holding, whether it be land holding or farm. There is no agricultural need for the building. As you've seen for yourself, that they were last used as a piggery a very long time ago indeed. There's no alternative use that you could reasonably be considered. Given the size of them, you know, you couldn't think that they could be built or used for other purposes other than that. They're structurally sound, and the rear extension is, I would say, is reasonable given the size of the existing barn. I think that members who attended the site visit would have realised themselves that it's a barn and a paddock, nothing more than that. Very close by is the very successful stables run by Evan Williams, which is developed as a rural business, making use of, in part, existing buildings and new buildings. They're related to business, and I think that to say that this is in the open countryside is perhaps not really thinking about what it is its neighbour, which is a very successful racing stable. So for those reasons, Chairman, I would like that we actually approve this application and go against the officer's recommendations, as you expect me to do. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with some of the points you said, but I think if you ask Councillor Ray Thomas what he would have done with that barn, I think he would have give you some different advice, but I'll ask Jonathan Bird.
Well, I'm just going to second it.
Okay then.
Because I'm a firm believer the building has merit. I don't see it has any other use. It certainly has no agricultural use. I would think it would be a very great shame to see this building fall into any more disrepair.
Okay.
And we are desperately trying to build houses in the Vale of Glamorgan. I forget how many tens of thousands it is now. I think this would reduce that by one, and it would make it a very nice addition to the Vale community.
Yes, Councillor Thomas.
Since you mentioned...
Yeah, that's right.
I'd like to see more of these buildings converted and made use of, because they're no good to agriculture as they are now. They're outdated. But some of them are very good structures, and I think we should be making use of them. I know I have converted buildings, and it's not a cheap option.
Well, he doesn't want competition either, Jim.
No.
No, but the thing is, I'd rather see these buildings used than just let them fall down.
Exactly,
There's
but I
many
was
in
just
my
pointing
area.
out there is options. They
Yeah.
said there were no options. There are options, and you
But
know that.
I think this would make a lovely house, and I think I'm going to support it, that it should be approved.
And I think it would make a lovely holiday let. But there you are. Andrew Parker.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. These field barns were quite unique in the Vale of Glamorgan. They really were part of the very large estates, and they were built to a very high quality. This barn probably is in excess of 150 years old. Most of them, because they haven't been used since mechanisation came in First World War or just after, have now fallen into disrepair. This one actually is in such good condition that it could be converted without any problem to what I think is the only use you could put it to is residential. If you tried to put it to any other use, security would be a major problem, because if it was only occupied part-time, then that would be a problem. And I think a conversion of this would do no harm to the character of the rural area, and in fact tidying up the front area would actually contribute to a scheme, and I would support again Councillor Jeff James's recommendation to approve it.
Right, we've gone from left to right. We'll finish up with Audrey then.
Thank you, Chairman. Unfortunately, I couldn't go to the site meeting, but I do know the area, and I think this would make a jolly nice home. I'm much in favour rather have a home than a barn that's just dilapidated. I mean, there may be other options, but the position it's in, I think a house is the best option. Thank you.
Yes, a lovely position right out in the open countryside. Falls in line with our policies, I'm sure. Yes, Councillor Gwyn Roberts, and then I'll move along.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with the sentiments that it's a building in good condition, it's an attractive building, and it wouldn't change much. It would make a nice house. But the simple fact is, it doesn't comply with our policies on planning, where we're trying to stop random development throughout the countryside. And if we allow this to go through, then so we will the whole policies gets torn to shreds. So I think, a shame that it is, I think we have to refuse it simply because the conditions we put in, it doesn't meet them, and therefore, with regret, I think we should refuse it.
Councillor Mark Wilson.
Yeah, my concern is if you read the highways comments, especially the third paragraph, it says, further, due to the absence of any manoeuvre facilities, vehicles will be required to either exit in reverse gear onto oncoming traffic. Now, I don't want to go into reverse gear onto oncoming traffic. I'm sure no one else wants to do that. And therefore, to me, that's a substantial objection that highways have made to this application. Moreover, I am very concerned that if we allow this application, then we will be in a very weak position to defend ourselves against other people who also want to provide us with a development like this. I see no harm for this accommodation to be used for tourism and for other sustainable development, as long as we can sort out the highways issues.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I think you might be reading the wrong page, but
there's no report in this as far
on the highways.
It is considered there is more than ample space for the provision of these spaces within the curtilage of the...
I think he accepts that. Yeah, he's read the wrong page. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually, I'm actually going to defend you, Chair. I don't think that you were trying to encourage the members of the Planning Committee not to listen to Councillor James.
Not at all.
I think that Councillor James is always worth listening to. With his experience and knowledge of the area and his experience on planning, it's a foolish person who would not listen to Councillor James. However, Councillor James isn't always right. And on this particular occasion, I think he's missed the mark. We do have policies, and they're there for a very important reason. And therefore, having listened to Councillor James and enjoyed, once again, his rhetoric, I feel that I must move the officer's recommendation.
Do you have a seconder?
Not yet.
Gwyn Roberts is seconder. Thank you. Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, Chair. I've had problems with this sort of application ever since I've been on the planning committee, because you stand in front of the building if you're on a site visit and you look at it and you think, well, what would be wrong with it being converted into a house? And it's taken me a while to sort of come up with a considered logic about it. And basically, it's to understand that each of these applications on its own, in common sense terms, can make sense. You look at it and you think, well, why shouldn't it be a house? But the problem lies in the precedent for it, that there are lots of these buildings all around the Vale. You let one go, and you then, in consistency, would have to let an awful lot go. You'll end up with a smattering of houses along highways in ways that we don't want them. And this one's actually easier in the sense that it really is out isolated in the countryside. Yes, it might have a riding stables just down the road, but it really is out on its own. And you know, we've got policies that recognise that need not to set a precedent and to hold the line across the Vale as a whole. And if we just junk those policies, we're making it up as we go along. And if planning is about anything, it's about policy and procedure. And to be honest, I don't necessarily always agree with those policies, but I feel as a member of the committee I am bound to have to follow them. So unfortunately in this case, yeah, it's a decent building, it would make a decent home, but in policy terms it definitely does not qualify. And I think, you know, it's difficult. It's all very well for us to say there are alternate uses that you could look at. There may be, there may not be. They may be economically viable, they may not be. But it is certainly against our policy, and I don't think we should be throwing those over.
I'll just ask the officer to come back on some of the points before we take some more members.
I think, Chairman, from my perspective, if members have a look at page 163 as well, I think the other issue here is that this site has been considered for planning permission previously as well, and admittedly it was back in 1990. But even then, the residential conversion of the barn without an extension was found to be unacceptable. I think in terms of where we are today with planning policy, particularly in terms of sustainability credentials of new developments, and the relevance of trying to provide for housing closer to services so that we reduce the impact on highways in terms of car journeys, and we try and accommodate development in more sustainable locations. That policy in particular has strengthened with time, and I think that's a key issue for me when you consider this application. And if members also look at the plan of the development, I think it's on the screen. you can see that there's a garden curtilage proposed as well, and that will bring with it quite a significant degree of domestication in a remote rural area, and all the residential trappings that come with it. And those are issues that this committee has raised as concerns previously when we've considered similar applications. And where, you know, we've been quite successful in defending our stance on these types of proposals. So very little to add other than that, Chair.
Thank you. I did have some other hands. I'll take Councillor Penrose and then Councillor Hodges, and then I'll work my way back down this line again. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, you know, having lived in that area for many years, I disagree with Councillor Drysdale's statement, because the road to Treguff is littered with small developments spaced out, and so it isn't. It was being isolated in terms of living in a town. In the rural community, I wouldn't say it was particularly isolated. When I first read the report before the site visit, whilst we don't predetermine anything, reading the report I tended to agree with Officer's recommendation. However, having visited it, I do think, as been said before, that it would make a reasonable domestic property. I was concerned that if we did refuse and it went to appeal, we could be likely on previous properties we've had of a similar type to be turned over by Welsh Government. The only thing which I'm not satisfied in, or I haven't been satisfied in my own mind in coming to the conclusion to recommend approval, is whether the consultants, Reading Agricultural, have really satisfied the clause on seeking alternatives to and publishing a 12 months notice. And I was going to ask the officer whether he feels they've satisfied that actual condition, because I've read through it, and to my mind, you know, I believe it's got to be advertised for 12 months and alternative usage be considered, which I thought was a bit remiss of Reading, as pointed out by Councillor Parker, because they're normally right on the ball.
Thank you. You want to come back, Rob?
The policies that are in place, and these are policies in national government as well as our own policies, do try to encourage uses for rural buildings other than for domestic properties in the first instance. So you can look at holiday let conversions, you can look at rural enterprises, stabling. Mention has been made of the stables just down the road from this site. So there are a whole host of uses that can be put to rural buildings where national policy and local policy directs owners or potential owners to look at those options first. There's no set time to do that, and there's no set time for buildings to be offered for sale for that purpose. It really just needs to be evidence that that has happened. If in the case that it hasn't happened, the application is still before you to be determined. It's one other issue that members should really consider. In terms of marketing a property for a certain length of time, that's the type of approach we would normally take on dwellings with agricultural ties, where we would look to see if that it's justifiable to remove the ties. But this is a different case to that. So marketing it for other uses doesn't necessarily come into the equation on this application. It's just whether the question is whether the building could be put to another use. On occasions that's tested, on other occasions it's not, and we have to deal with the application before us. You know, there are potential uses for it. Holiday lets is one, and there are a lot of successful holiday conversions in the Vale, increasingly so, where conversions have taken place. And there are other examples where buildings like this can be used for rural enterprises or typically rural activities. So stabling is another example, and there's a commercial stables just around the corner. So there are options. Whether those options have been tested or not, I think as members you have to deal with the application that's before you irrespective of that.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Hodges.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I say first of all, I found the heritage statement in the late reps very, very interesting and quite helpful. But my main point really is within the body of the report itself. We've had reference to the previous application, 1990, being refused, but we also have reference on the previous page, 162, about other ones that seem to have been allowed, almost as old, in fact slightly younger, 92, 94, that sort of age, and they seem to be as relevant to the historical sort of aspect as 1990. So I'm not going to get too hung up about a previous refusal 25 years ago. I want to look at this as it stands now. Now, we have allowed conversions in the rural Vale, and we have obviously allowed conversions to holiday lets in the rural Vale in the past as well. I have no issue with this becoming a residence. I think it would lend itself well. It's an interesting building, and I don't think that'll alter or change the way that we're looked at in the future, looking at other applications. What I will say is that if we do turn this down, we're in the hands of any appeal anyway, and I have to say that this one seems to have more weight to a conversion than many of the others I've seen in the past, which I voted against. So I'm minded to support this, Chairman, unless I have any other reason why I can't.
I did read an appeal decision on another one, Ystrad Owen. Do you want to refer to that one? Because he has raised it as what would happen if it went to an appeal. Yeah.
Yeah, well, Chairman, that's just included for reference because it gives you an example of an appeal against a conversion in terms of suitability of a barn given the location and whether it was in a sustainable location or not. So it's there for reference. It's there for members to have regard to because it just demonstrates that these are issues that the planning committee and inspectors will and should look at.
Thank you. I think Jonathan Bird was itching, or was it Ray Thomas? Right. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, with my experience of converting barns for holiday lets, I would not, in my own opinion, convert that one for a holiday let, as it is secluded, it'd be on its own, and for security purposes. Where ours are, we've got the old farm buildings, there's people in the house, so it is safe. And you find that a lot of people are not interested in holiday lets really way out in the countryside. They like to be near amenities, a lot nearer amenities. So I think the holiday lets out. But this is a really good, solid building. I wasn't on the site visit, but I know the barn. And I'm just reminded of the one we refused, which the people won an appeal at Lammy Hangle. And that one, I still think, should never have been given because it's on unstable ground. And yet, when it went to appeal, the Welsh inspector gave that one. And I still think that, but this one, if this went to appeal, I don't think we have a leg to stand on. This is a very substantial building, and I'd like to support this one being approved.
Okay, Jonathan Bird.
Chair, just a quickie. Rob came up with a very prudent point about if that garden curtilage was changed from as it is now. Well, it's a ruffled paddock there now. It looks a bit of a mess. But could we not restrict, if we were minded to overturn this, could we not restrict the size of the garden and keep it to a bare minimum, or have a two-part garden? One, where you have a household garden, a manicured, and then the extended area has to be kept as open countryside type thing. So I'm just wondering if that could be an option, Chair, just so it doesn't affect the views from afar.
I'm told, yes, that can happen. Yes, Councillor Andrew Parker.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to quickly read from note 3 of the local planning guidance, H3, and they actually only have 2 criteria that I found, and I stand to be corrected, that there is no longer an agricultural need and that alternative non-residential uses have proved inappropriate. And I think actually in this case, both of those criteria, which are the only 2 criteria I can find on H3, have been met by this application.
Thank you. Okay. Is it something we haven't heard before, Audrey, or are you going to add something? Yeah, come on then.
I did have my hand
We
up
have had a good
long
debate.
ago.
Yeah.
Can I speak, or may I speak?
Yes, come forward, speak.
Right. We talk of policies. Well, I thought our policy was every application was treated on its own merits. So
Right.
therefore, I mean, you can't, someone said, oh, it's because something else is the same, but surely this application must be treated on its own merits, not because something else was the same. And they say about being isolated, well, it is in the countryside. It's not like living in, Siberia, or what, we are out in the wild. So I mean, not everybody wants to have someone living next door to borrow sugar from. No, I'm all in agreement for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Giles Birch.
Thank you. This isn't about testing how well made the building is. It isn't about testing our sympathy for the person who would like to live there and develop it. It's about a policy about not having houses in the open countryside. And that's what should be first in our minds, I would have thought. If we don't actually observe the policies, there's not much good in having policies and drawing them up.
Right.
I think that we ought to stick to the policy. We don't want a house and a garden in the open countryside, where there is at the moment just a barn.
Thank you. Well, it's been moved and seconded by, I think it was Councillor Jeff James, and seconded by Jonathan Bird, to approve this application. So I'll go straight to the vote. It's simply yes or no. Those who are in favour of approving this application, please show. Okay then. And those, it's been moved and seconded that we accept the officer's recommendation. Sorry? Oh, and those against, yeah, of course it is. Nine. Okay then, we'll move to the, and one abstention, Kevin Marnie. Thank you. And it was moved and seconded. Can you remember who, Gwyn Roberts, was it? Yeah, I think it was. John moved it. For officers' recommendation, those in favour, please show. 9. And those against? Okay, and abstentions? Quite a number of abstentions. Okay, that's clearly carried its officer recommendation. Thank you for that. I understand that the application, the old farmhouse, Treehangle, yes, has been withdrawn on page 167, so that's withdrawn. There's just one chairman's urgent item that we need to focus on. Have you got a copy of it? Unless it's underneath here. Oh, lovely. Yeah, I've got it in front of me now. It's Agenda 12I. This is land and buildings at the site servicing recycling hangars at Landau Trading Estate in Landau. I think Rob would like to speak about it.
Yes, Chair, if I can just take members through this. I appreciate you've not had sight of it for the length of time that you'd have had your planning papers, but we've received a complaint about construction of an extension down at Site Serve Hangars in Llandau, 2 former aircraft hangars. The site's been inspected and a lot of works are underway at the site. The key issue for us is that it looks as if, well, it doesn't look as if the hangars are in use for storage of waste material. Hangar 1 is being used to store paper, cardboard, and a baler has been situated in the building, and we are told that it'll be operational from March. Hangar 2 has mixed plastic materials and processed plastic materials. This represents a potential change of use of the premises.
Yeah.
I have to say at this stage that we're still in discussion with the owners. A planning application has been submitted, but that application isn't valid at the moment, Chair, which means that we don't have a proposal before us for consideration. We're bringing this report for you tonight under your urgent powers because we want to have the comfort that we can take action if we feel that it's necessary. I would say, as explained in the report, that the intention isn't to take action immediately, but to continue to discuss the situation with the owner. But this report, if you authorise it tonight, it will give us the comfort that we do have the necessary powers to take enforcement action and, if necessary, a stop notice if it comes to the situation that the use continues uncontrolled and that we don't succeed in our negotiations.
Thank you for that, Rob. I think Ray Thomas wanted to speak.
I think this is great to see that this is being done because he's flouted the law a lot in our area and upset a lot of the local people. And it's on my patch, and it is a headache to me. And I've been having some information this afternoon. People have been trying to look with National Resources Wales about his licences, and they can't seem to find anything that relates to this site. The only licences he got are to the old sites, which are both burnt down now. So at the moment, he is whatever he's doing there. It doesn't look as if he's got the right credentials to do it anyway. So I'm glad this is being done, and thank you very much for that.
Okay, Councillor Parker.
Just a bit of clarification, really. I don't know hangars A and B, but obviously they are quite a historic part of the original airfield, and whether or not they should be listed is something which maybe should be considered if they were. My concern is obviously there has been a serious fire down there that we went to look at when we were looking at the site for prospective drilling. If this has got inflammable materials, we might lose 2 buildings, which I'm not sure, but may be of historic importance in terms of the heritage of the Vale.
Okay, Councillor Nick Hodges.
I've got no issue with supporting the belt, putting the gun in the holster sort of thing for potential use on the enforcement action. As a question, really, I mean, on inspection, it said Hangar 1 had paper cardboard and Hangar 2 had plastics. Do we know where they're coming from? It's a transfer station, but it's not coming, I assume, from anywhere in the Vale. I'd be intrigued to know where it's coming from, but that's just me being nosy. I'm happy, certainly, to support the officer's recommendation.
Okay. Okay, then. Everybody happy? Officer's recommendation that we endorse this paper. All those in favour? That's unanimous. So, endorsed. Thank you for that. I'll see you on March the 12th at the site visit in Roos.